No mission could break Pierce Brosnan's tuxedo. Finding the one location where he could still be broken, however, didn't require a mission. Behind the Aston Martin, 007's charm and command came from an Irish youngster who rarely saw his mother and was raised without a father. Later on, fame gave him everything the world could look up to. However, it was unable to save Charlotte, his daughter, who died of the same ovarian cancer 22 years later, or Cassandra, the wife who became his home. And today, at 73, Pierce Brosnan continues to carry a pain that no spotlight has ever been able to erase as he returns to the spotlight in new roles. His story's deepest pain didn't start in Hollywood, but rather in a childhood molded by waiting, distance, and the fear that love might disappear once more. Please subscribe and give Pierce a like before we start. A subdued homage to the guy who is not Bond. The earliest lessons Pierce Brosnan learned about love were about distance. He was raised in Navan after being born in Drogheda on May 16, 1953. When Pierce was a baby, his father Thomas abandoned him. His mother May left for London at the age of 4 to pursue nursing training and employment. Sometimes only once or twice a year she came back whenever employment permitted. Initially, Pierce resided with his maternal grandparents. He lived with an aunt, an uncle, and then Eileen Riley's lodge after they passed away. The roofs were altered. The folks in his immediate vicinity did not vanish. "My grandfather was the hand that I held," he remembered afterwards. Pierce slept in a tiny iron bed next to a window at Eileen's house, protected from the light by a bright green curtain with newspaper pinned up. From the outside it may seem dismal. Pierce recalled it fondly. Eileen's kids became friends. It was happiness. It was joy. He found a small slide projector and buddies in the streets. His mother transformed a simple room into a private movie theater by bringing Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck home and projecting them across the ceiling. Then, one Christmas, May was unable to come back due to her job. A pair of tattered boxing gloves appeared in her place. Pierce stored them in his bookcase for many years. He didn't have to give an explanation. The gloves had survived the journey. At the age of 11, Pierce returned to his mother and her new husband, William Carmichael, in August 1964. In a life full shifting addresses, Bill offered stability. Additionally, Pierce's family took him to see Goldfinger during his initial weeks in Britain. Bond, played by Sean Connery, dominated the screen with poise, control, and danger that remained motionless. London didn't feel as friendly outside the theater. Pierce resolved that the term Irish would belong to him before it could be used against him after classmates started calling him such. He started training in commercial illustration at the age of 16, leaving school with a cardboard folder full of sketches. The first thing was painting. He was first exposed to dance, mime, and performance in an experimental theater workshop, which is how acting came about almost by accident. Rather than pedigree, the room needed presence. Pierce remained. Later, he studied the discipline behind each gesture and line during his 3 years of training at the Drama Centre, London. "When acting found me, it was a liberation," he stated. After moving through multiple houses, the youngster discovered a craft that required him to remain motionless, speak clearly, and be seen. Liberation, however, was just the start. Outside of the classroom, he faced rejection, tiny jobs, unpredictable compensation, and a protracted journey to the position that would make his name famous. Pierce Brosnan discovered no waiting limousine, no contract, and no assurance that skill would be sufficient outside the Drama Centre London classrooms. He joined York's Theatre Royal after finishing his studies in 1975 and made an appearance in Wait Until Dark. The labor required discipline, but the portions were minor. Be ready, secure the room, and earn another night. In a few months, he was chosen by Tennessee Williams to portray McCabe in the British production of The Red Devil Battery Sign in 1977. Williams wrote a brief telegram after witnessing Brosnan's performance saying, "Thank God for you, my dear boy." The message was encouraging rather than immediately famous. He was introduced to London critics by the production, which also helped him transition from small theater to larger stages and screen tryouts. At first, film merely opened small doors. Brosnan made a brief appearance in The Mirror Cracked in 1980 among well-known actors, including Elizabeth Taylor and Angela Lansbury. He joined Bob Hoskins and Helen Mirren in The Harsh World of the Long Good Friday the same year. Although the performances were brief, they put him in prominent productions and brought him closer to more stable employment. He had more space thanks to television. His first Golden Globe nomination came from Nancy Astor, and The Manions of America introduced him to a larger audience. Viewers were now able to see his work outside of the theater. American television was the deciding factor. In NBC's romantic detective series, Brosnan debuted in 1982 as the enigmatic con artist who goes by the name Remington Steele. Laura Holt of Stephanie Zimbalist led the investigations. Viewers remembered Brosnan's wit, grace, danger, and effortless connection. The five-season run of Remington Steele, which debuted on October 1, 1982, provided him with the consistent exposure that years of fleeting appearances had not. Additionally, it formed an association from which he was unable to break free. The well-tailored clothes, arched eyebrows, and restrained charisma bore an uncanny resemblance to James Bond. Before he had played the part, audiences started seeing him as 007. In 1986, that possibility came to pass. Brosnan was given the opportunity to replace Roger Moore as Bond after Remington Steele was canceled. But NBC had the authority to bring the show back for 60 days. He had been told that everything will work out. He was heading to the beach with champagne for Cassandra on the last day of the contractual window when the phone rang. He was informed by his agent that the agreement had fallen through. More episodes were desired by NBC. Albert "Cubby" Broccoli, a Bond producer, refused to share his new 007 with the TV show. Instead, Timothy Dalton was cast in the part. Afterwards, Brosnan merely said, "That was a blow," and went back to his job. His portfolio was replete with assignments that required more than polished charm in the years that followed. He performed in a darker, riskier register with Michael Caine in the 1987 film The Fourth Protocol. Mrs. Doubtfire cast him alongside Robin Williams and Sally Field in one of the most popular family comedies in America in 1993. Instead of showing potential, these ventures demonstrated range. He had the ability to convey humor, romance, threat, and restraint. The public's perception of Bond stayed close. However, his career went on without it. It had been 8 years since that call on the way to the beach by 1994. In addition, he had suffered many more losses in his life than a lost part. Brosnan was offered Bond once more when Timothy Dalton withdrew. He made his public debut as the fifth James Bond on June 8th. 2 days later, while filming Robinson Crusoe in a remote area of Papua New Guinea, kids recognized him from the global announcement and yelled, "James Bond, James Bond." Although no Bond movie starring him had yet to hit theaters, the announcement had made it to even that far-off place. GoldenEye returned to the series in 1995 following a 6-year hiatus. The future of 007 was uncertain, audiences had evolved, and the Cold War was over. Brosnan had high aspirations going into the production. He blended a tough edge appropriate for a new era with the refined audiences associated with Remington Steele. Bond's preconceived notions were questioned by Judi Dench's recently appointed M, and the narrative set him in a world free from the battles that had shaped him. The movie had a great opening, went on to become a global hit, and revived the franchise after it had been dormant for years. At the time, it was the most successful Bond movie commercially, earning over $350 million worldwide. The moment had the weight of everything that had come before it for Brosnan. 8 years of waiting, a contract that once closed the door, television fame, stage work, and fleeting screen appearances. At last, Pierce Brosnan had landed the part that had eluded him. Additionally, viewers immediately embraced him as Bond from his first assignment this time. When Pierce Brosnan first encountered Cassandra Harris in London in the middle of the 1970s, James Bond was still years away. He already understood what it was like to grow up in between houses by that point. Something more stable, a wife, 2 kids, and a family that completely embraced him, came with Cassandra. He was no longer a visitor to Charlotte and Christopher. Pierce adopted them after their biological father passed away, and they assumed his name. Sean was born in September 1983, after he and Cassandra got married in 1980. At home, the actor was already fulfilling the duties that were most important to him, husband and father, even though he was still vying for bigger parts. Cassandra recognized the unpredictability of the life of an actor. She stood by him when Remington Steele carried his face into American homes, supported his work, and assisted him in making critical decisions. Years before Bond finally made a comeback to Pierce, she had also made an appearance in For Your Eyes Only in 1981. Pierce later claimed that she influenced him as a father, actor, and man. 3 kids, friends, work-related conversations, and the typical chaos of family life were all present in their home. Together, they planned goals, had children, and changed occupations during those years, but they had no idea when illness would stop them. During the family's 1987 trip to India for the Deceivers, Cassandra had extreme fatigue and her stomach started to expand. Ovarian cancer was discovered after surgery back in London. Their life's rhythm was immediately altered by the diagnosis. Cassandra had 8 surgeries and treatment for almost 18 months. When her strength returned, she continued to lead family life, questioned treatments, and made her own judgments. Pierce characterized himself as the silent person by her side, there for every test and every uncertain outcome. Sean was still quite young. He occasionally posed as his mother's physician after chemotherapy left her worn out. Sean would sometimes play doctor, Pierce said. He remained close to her until she could get back up, talk to the kids, talk about Pierce's work, or come up with another idea for the house. The family's daily battle to keep everyday life going had included a kids' game. The home was not silenced by illness. Friends recalled kids yelling and leaping into the pool at their Malibu house as Cassandra stood by. She continued to traverse the steep property with Pierce 2 days after one chemotherapy treatment, despite being weak and losing her hair, before they made the decision to purchase it. She started to feel most comfortable around the house. Pierce resumed painting throughout those years as well, using his hands and fingers while coping with his fear of losing her. The treatments provided less hope as Cassandra's condition deteriorated. Pierce subsequently said that he regretted not asking her if she was worried because her resolve had appeared so strong. She consoled him as he battled bewilderment and rage about a week before her last hospital stay. Their options had become more limited at that point. They prayed while holding hands at the hospital. Pierce attempted to read aloud at the foot of her bed after a priest left religious readings. Even after years of learning lines, the performer was unable to maintain the order of the words. He said he was sorry for messing them up. He leaned near her lips, unable to hear her response. The last words he could fully understand from Cassandra were, "Always an actor." Charlotte called from London early on December 28, 1991. Pierce kept Charlotte on the phone and held Cassandra. A few moments later, Christopher showed up. One day after the couple's 11th wedding anniversary, Cassandra passed away at the age of 43. When Pierce got home that afternoon, he put Sean on his lap. He informed him that his mother had passed away. The boy's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. She was no longer in pain, Sean said. Pierce went to counseling for both Sean and himself. He tried to find a job that would allow him to go in the morning and return at night, and he let the kids see his tears. He maintained daily communication with Charlotte and managed Christopher and Sean's household. He claimed that Cassandra was still there in every aspect of the man he had grown into 4 months after her passing. As James Bond, she never witnessed the world's acceptance of him. However, audiences' later admiration for her steadfastness had already been put to the test next to her, in hospital hallways, in child-filled family rooms, and in the recollection of one hand clasping another. Pierce loved Charlotte Brosnan, but she was more than just his daughter. She had one of his family's coziest voices. After her real father, Dermot Harris, passed away, he came into her life when she was still a small girl and adopted her. Pierce claimed years later that his most vivid recollection was straightforward. He could always make her laugh. With her lifelong companion Alex Smith and their kids, Isabella and Lucas, Charlotte created a life. She was the mother at home, the person her kids looked forward to seeing, the voice they knew, the joke they shared, and the focal point of everyday life. Then there was a second case of ovarian cancer in the family. In 1991, Charlotte had witnessed her mother, Cassandra, succumb to the illness. She was given the same diagnosis over 20 years later. She continued to live as a partner, mother, sister, and daughter during her 3 years of treatment. When the family announced her passing, Pierce went on to describe how she handled those years with grace and humanity, courage and dignity. Time had become excruciatingly scarce by June 2013. Just weeks before she passed away, Charlotte wed Alex, the man she had raised Isabella and Lucas with. Marriage, kids, and the family gathered around her dominated the day. Hospital scheduling and therapy no longer defined the space for a few valuable hours. As those closest to them saw the promise, Charlotte stood next to the guy who had shared her life. Charlotte passed away in London on June 28, 2013, at the age of 41. She was accompanied by Alex. Along with her brothers, Christopher and Sean, were Isabella, 14, and Lucas, 8. Pierce made a succinct public statement. He encouraged people to pray for her children and referred to her as his darling daughter. In addition, he prayed for a quick recovery, focusing the family's own grief on the illness that had now claimed mother and daughter. 2 young children had to go on without their mother after 3 years of consultations, therapy, and cautious hope. The next year, the full impact of that loss became apparent. Pierce discussed the 2 women whose lives had been taken by ovarian cancer at the 2014 Stand Up to Cancer broadcast. Years before, he recalled clutching Cassandra's hand. Then he talked about holding his funny, wonderful daughter, Charlotte, by the hand just before she passed away. Along with 2 generations of his family, the same father was now dealing with the same illness. He hesitated. There was no need to explain the image. Every member of the family was affected by Charlotte's passing. Alex's wife passed away. Lucas and Isabella lost the person who had influenced their formative years. A family that had previously adapted to Cassandra's absence had to deal with the same disease once more after Christopher and Sean lost their sister. Through the quality that disease had never taken away from Charlotte, Pierce continued to remember her. He wrote, "Here's looking at you, kid," years later, and a family friend recalled the memory that stuck with him the most. The delight of making Charlotte giggle. That joy should be placed next to the sadness. Charlotte is still the wife Alex chose, the sister who grew up next to Christopher and Sean, the daughter Pierce adopted and adored, and the mother whose influence is felt through Isabella and Lucas. Pierce carried both women with him when he later appeared in front of cameras to promote cancer research. He had previously held Cassandra's hand. Charlotte's did too, years later. The repetition didn't need to be metaphorical for a father. In 1994, 3 years after Cassandra's passing, and before GoldenEye cast him as James Bond, Pierce Brosnan met Keely Smith in Cabo San Lucas. They met at a party in Mexico while Keely was employed as a journalist. They started dating at a time when Pierce's career was starting to take off again and his family was still dealing with an older loss. Keely never had to compete with it, and he didn't need anyone else to erase that past. What they created was a part of the life that followed. Keely contributed her own work, beliefs, and public voice to the partnership. She had covered environmental concerns before going on to become a filmmaker and activist. Long before they were married, Pierce accompanied her to campaigns and benefits, and their mutual passion for wildlife, oceans, and the places their children would inherit became a part of their union. Later, they collaborated with environmental groups to oppose a proposed liquefied natural gas project off the coast of California and a salt mill in Laguna San Ignacio in Mexico. Rather than relying solely on the stereotype of Hollywood romance, their marriage grew as a result of their public job and family life. Dylan, their first son, was born in 1997. In 2001, Paris came next. With their family gathered around them, Pierce and Keely tied the knot on August 4th of that year at Ballintubber Abbey in County Mayo, Ireland. A household with multiple history was joined by the ceremony. Pierce's elder children, Cassandra's recollection, and the two young sons he and Keely were raising together. Presenting one family as a substitute for another was not necessary. As fresh birthdays, school years, holidays, and everyday mornings piled up next to it, the past remained a part of the house. Pierce and Keely have used more straightforward language than rescue or destiny to explain the basis of their marriage. He has talked about getting along, enjoying each other, and finding solutions to issues year after year. In response, Keely used two words: being best friends. This explanation has more weight than the well-known assertion that one person saved the other. Decisions they made repeatedly over time strengthened their closeness, even in the absence of cameras, raising children, upholding a blended family, encouraging artistic endeavors, and pursuing common causes.